Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. We hope you are well. Welcome to the second edition of our Zoom download series. We are really excited for this one today. We had a great discussion a couple of weeks ago, and judging by the response today, a lot of people were very interested in it too. There was several hundred responses today too, so we're really excited for everybody joining us. For those of you that we do not know, or I do not know, my name is Ryan Harding. I'm an executive managing director in Los Angeles with Newmark. My partner Jen will introduce herself in a second. But essentially what we want to talk about today is actually what we think is sort of the next step in this process, and that being, rent deferrals and discussions and market discussions have taken place over the last 6 to 8 weeks since everything happened. And now people are starting to think about the onboarding, the re-onboarding into the office and what that's going to look like. Governor Cuomo, who has been very present in the news over the last several months, came out and said he advised companies to essentially reimagine their entire workplace and how many people can actually work from home versus coming into the office with the ability for the business to still be successful. Limiting face-to-face interactions and the spontaneous collaboration sessions and all the things that tech companies, creative companies, and companies that are sort of trying to move into the future have been trying to do for the last 12, 15 years is really being thrown into question right now. Things like temperature checks could be normalized going forward, which many CEOs believe. Masks, as we've all seen, are here probably for quite some time. And so we have a couple of our colleagues on, some of our most senior and brilliant colleagues in New York and San Francisco to join us, who will introduce themselves in a second. But with that, I thought I'd pass it off to Jen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Frisk. Ryan and I work together in LA, and we had about 130 of you when we did this 2 weeks ago. And apparently you liked it because we've got quite a few more joining today. So thanks for joining us again. We had a lot of great comments and feedback after we did this. One of which we know Ryan freezes from time to time, so you can put that in the chat, but he's got it, he's working on it. The Wi-Fi isn't great. I was told to smile more, so I'm gonna work on that today. But other than that, we had also a lot of really great questions for you, like Ryan said, as we move forward into kind of what feels like the next phase of this. One of my favorite questions was, is the cubicle going to be cool again? Which for all of us who worked in the 80s, 90s, up until like 5 years ago, we know that was not cool. But we're really gonna focus today on kind of the health and safety components as we all kind of think about what returning to the office looks like. And really at the end of the day, how do we restore employee confidence and just a way to feel good as we start to move about our cities, our offices, really everywhere outside of our homes. And there's kind of an intangible emotional piece that I think we'll touch on a little bit, unless you're in Florida and you just obviously don't care. But how do we feel? And so we're gonna let Ben and Liz introduce themselves and kick it off with that and just talk really briefly about how things kind of feel where they are, which is Liz in San Francisco and then Ben in New York.
Great. Ben, do you
One
want
of you guys can start?
Go ahead, Ben.
Sure.
We
Hi, everyone.
everything but that.
Right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Shapiro. I'm a vice chairman in our New York City office at Newmark. And I would do a lot of tenant representation as well as landlord representation. My practice is split about 50-50. And most of the last 45 days I've spent talking to owners of real estate and owners of businesses about how we re-envision the New York City office market and the office place. New York has obviously been hit very hard by the pandemic. And I think a lot of it is due to our spatial closeness, and it's really what makes us vulnerable. A lot of what I'd like to talk to you guys about today is how we're planning to sort of think through it, become more efficient, become smarter, get everybody healthy and back to the office as quick as possible.
I don't know if we all froze or just Ben for a second there.
There we go. Go ahead, Liz.
Great. My name's Liz Hart. I'm a vice chairman in our San Francisco office. And like Ben, I split my time 50-50 between landlords and tenants. And so excited to talk to you guys today about the early trends that we're seeing, what we're learning from markets that are reopening sort of in real time now, And, lastly, some thoughts on how our innovative culture in the Bay Area could potentially lead us forward with new ways of working and thinking and actually occupying the office space as well.
Did I get through my monologue, or did I get thrown off?
You almost made it to the end, Ben, but we cut you off because you froze.
Okay,
you're still great looking, but you did get thrown off. That's
okay,
all right.
good. Liz, you're out of here from Liz anyway.
So from both your perspectives, I mean, if you could just give us maybe a 30-second, 45-second overview on kind of what's been happening in each of your cities, because both of your cities, because of Liz, because of, I think, the tech background and their leadership, both from a space perspective and an office perspective, just the redesign and reimagination of it, 20 years ago. Ben, from just being the center of it all. I mean, what have you seen in the last 6 weeks that's changed, and what are people saying about what's going to happen going forward?
Sure. Well, I think basically everything has changed in the last 6 weeks, so there's a lot of content to cover there. But some things I think are unique about San Francisco is, first of all, a lot of the technology companies, the larger ones, Salesforce, Google, Facebook, and the like, actually sort of led us into a stay-at-home order by actually telling their employees not to come to the office prior to the mayor actually saying that for all people. And I think that trend is sort of them leading the way early into a stay-at-home, work-from-home model is going to continue as we kind of go back to our new normal as well, with, as you mentioned, workers who are non-essential that do not need to go in the office even after stay-at-home orders are lifted, taking a much slower and sort of trickle in approach to reoccupying workspace. But I don't know.
From a New York perspective, and I hope I didn't freeze again, but from a New York perspective, our market was doing really well before this happened, and what we're seeing now is a real public health crisis. And yeah, sure. Can you hear me, or am I still freezing?
I can hear. You're good now, Ryan's from
Okay, good. I thought I started talking, but again, our market was humming along nicely before COVID. And I think what we're finding now is there's a real public health crisis, right? We rely on public transportation. There's 5.5 million plus people that ride the subway every day to get to and from work and to their apartments as part of their daily commute. And I think that our biggest concern and our biggest fear is, how are these people going to get back to work safely? And if, how are you going to be in a position to get around in New York City? Because the reliance on public transportation, where there's a deadly virus out there that's contact spreading, how are we going to figure all that out? And I think until we feel a lot better about really herd immunity and other sort of, metrics and mechanisms that Governor Cuomo is focused on, I think we're going to be locked down longer than anybody, just because, we can't afford to be out and about. We're just too densely populated. We have 10 million people in New York City. And like you said, guys, we've been hit pretty hard. So unfortunately, I think we're going to be on the sidelines longer than LA and San Francisco.
And how do we balance that and one of the things to kind of keep in mind too, and as I know there was an article in National Geographic that came out over the weekend, but when we're looking at kind of Zoom fatigue and work from home fatigue and talking about, getting back to work, but really how long this next phase in is going to take and what that looks like. How do we keep people, ourselves, our clients, their employees, like mentally healthy through what seems to be, at least, especially in California, New York, probably the majority of the rest of the year in some sort of phased component? I mean, how do we balance those two things?
It's going to be a hard balance, I think, especially, depending on when children are able to go back to school and sort of, that returns to normal. But what I would say, like some kind of best practices that I've heard clients talk about that I think make a lot of sense is, potentially limiting meetings to a shorter period of time. So as an example, if it's usually a 30-minute meeting, making it 20 minutes or 50 instead of 60. And the purpose of that is really just to allow people a 10-minute break in between to, go to the bathroom, get a glass of water, all those really important things that, you kind of don't do when you're just stacked one right after the other.
I think that to Liz's point as well, there's going to be really high propensity for tenants to focus on cleaning of surfaces and processes and procedures in place that allow people to feel productive and safe and healthy. We can talk about this a little bit later on, Ryan, but there's sort of, and Jen, there's three there's three sort of pathways to think about. It's how hard.
All right, well, we'll give Ben a second to come back and we'll jump to the next question, which a lot of you guys all had who submitted questions via the RSVP, and really just for kind of from a square footage standpoint. And we've talked a lot about this. I mean, is this a net zero sum game? Obviously it's too soon to tell right now, but as we get into this a year or 2 years from now, does the work from home component make up for additional space required, or what does that kind of look like from a square footage standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's too early to tell right now. Some early trends that we're experiencing is if you're in, a smaller, call it sub 10 to 15,000 square foot space, then you may need to take some opportunistic moves to take a little bit more space to give you a larger cushion, particularly if you are really dense, because you just didn't have as much amenity space to balance with. For our more medium-sized users, a lot of times you did have quite a bit of larger conference rooms and or amenity areas, kind of touchdown areas that may not be utilized in the same way going forward. So those can be repurposed to spread out desks and think about things differently. And then on the larger companies, I think you're right. You're going to see a prolonged work from home model that will offset what they're doing in the short run. But I think that there's a real hesitancy from the people I'm talking to implement too large of a furniture redesign or, a very large capital plan around getting or disposing of more real estate until we get more information. And so it's going to be a little bit of wait and see. But the other thing to keep in mind is just like from a practicality standpoint, if you decide you need 15 to 20% more space, it may not actually financially make sense to move unless there's something adjacent in the building or close. Given all those costs. And there's no question that all businesses are going to be very capital focused this year, given, massive changes in our economy and how we're thinking about our lives right now.
Liz, you make up a great point, is that I think the tenants are not going to be in a position to just grow their real estate footprint because it's practical in the short term, right? Leases are 10 years. We think of this as an 18 to 30 month problem. So I think that people are going to get smarter and they're going to, like you said, utilize work from home as a strategy versus the capital spend of construction or differentiating furniture products that allow people to socially distance. There's just not enough time to amortize the capital.
Yeah, I think the behavioral changes, and I don't know if you disagree, Ben, I think the behavioral changes are some what the more immediate things to deal with, and then the physical changes will track behind that. And behavioral changes can be everything from how you work in your kitchen, can you actually refill your water bottle in the sink, or do you need to go to bottles, or some of the things we've moved away from in the past. And I think, we're going to deal with behavior when you come in the office, how you interact, how you touch or do not touch the same objects, how you clean or don't clean the same objects. And then after we get through all the behavior, a substantial number of them, then we'll start evaluating, physical changes and more dedication.
And Liz, maybe you can both of you can kind of touch on that further. Maybe Liz from the landlord side, Ben from the tenant side, but what needs to happen so that employees can feel comfortable returning to offices and buildings? I mean, what's the responsibility of the company, of the landlord, and what are you hearing from Liz, from your landlord clients? Here's what we're thinking about implementing. And Ben, maybe from the tenant side, here's what we're thinking about doing interiorly within the office space.
So there's a couple different things to touch on there. When do people feel comfortable? I think that most landlords and tenants that I'm talking to are putting the decision in the individual's hands. And when they feel comfortable returning, they will educate them to their ability. They will provide them with public information from the CDC and others to show them, what they're doing in this space. But if an employee ultimately does not feel comfortable because of, their own unique circumstances, there's a lot of latitude for the employee to make the own decision. So that's the first. The second, in regards to liability, that has not yet been kind of, gone through courts. We don't know who the liability is going to lie with at the end of the day. So again, just relying on individuals to make their own choices and businesses and landlords to do their best efforts to create a safe environment. So some of the things, we're seeing implemented, certainly if there's any ability to get fresh air into places like lobbies, by keeping doors open, some really simple things like that, that's one. Limiting the amount of people who are allowed up an elevator, turning security from being a card key that you touch to some sort of, phone system that allows you access. touchless, voiceless when you can, with things like faucets, with buttons on elevators. I have heard some unique things, like clients who are going to enact a policy of removing shoes and outer clothing at the door, basically, so that you're wearing something different inside. So you're not kind of going through public transportation with the same coat on, as an example. Certainly things like potentially bringing your own utensils and mugs or other things into the office so that there's not someone touching dishes in the communal areas. I mean, it's kind of an endless list of things people are considering. I think one of the things I thought was more interesting that I learned recently is, obviously not right now because PPE is in, very much need on the front lines of this crisis, but eventually when we go back to work, companies contemplating actually providing PPE to their employees, which, would be mandated within the space, but actually supplying it to them as well, which I thought was interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, to tack on to what Liz said before we jump into the tenant, we're dealing with, and for the people on this call that interface in perhaps offices in New York City, what we're concerned about right now is there's landlord processes that are going to be put in place, right? Like Liz brought up the example of a temperature check at the door. But we're running into issues, and we're speaking to a lot of local attorneys that it's not legally permissible in New York City to mandate someone's temperature, right? There's Hippocratic oaths that violate specific to New York City law. So what we're trying to get smart on is, okay, how do you enact these best practices while still keeping into having the concept of, what's A, legal, and B, what's good for the building, what isn't bad PR. So I think these are going to have to evolve, and there's going to be New York City laws and statutes that are going to need to change in the short term to sort of allow for landlords to create safe buildings, right? So Liz talked about that, and once you get to the floor, I think it's going to be a combination of procedures about what to do when you get to the office. As Liz said, it's going to be a larger work from home and work and shift model. And there's going to be heavy cleaning of high impact areas like receptions, bathrooms, and conference spaces. But I think that once people get to their space and get to their desk, they're going to be comfortable. And I think there's going to be enough people that are going to be affected by this where hopefully, I know this sounds a little perverse to say, but by the fall or later, we're going to have enough knowledge and interaction with this virus that you're going to kind of know what to do when someone around you gets it. And there's going to be better tracing and better contact tracing and testing. And I think all those things have to naturally evolve. And Newmark has a great workplace group that is starting to advise companies, and apologize for the 30-second commercial, but what we're doing is we're talking to people and saying, okay, what's the roadmap to get you back on and running as an organization? Do you want to partner with a local urgent care center to have diagnostic testing within your office space? Do you want to offer, Uber and Uber rides and Uber Eats so people can control the lunch environment so they're not going to the local restaurant? And from the retail perspective, what New York is going to see a huge influx of is sort of smart quick service restaurants or QSRs, where you're going to order something via an app. It's going to be ready for you in a quick and efficient manner. So you're in a public space, right? The famous Chopped line, for those of you who've been to New York City or a Chopped, that snakes around 4 city blocks to get the same bad salad. You're going to walk in and out and get that really quick. And I think those are the types of procedures that we're going to have to use over the next 2 to 3 years, hopefully less, to manage this appropriately.
And we have a lot of people joining us from different parts of the country that rely more on public transportation than we do here in Los Angeles. And you gave some interesting thoughts the other day when we were speaking about public transportation in New York, and 5.5 million people, I think, was the number you used, that use it each day.
The subway specifically.
How do people get to work when you go back, even if it was January of next year? How does that impact?
We don't know. We really don't know. It's an amazing challenge when you look at where people are coming from, right? So there's getting to New York City, which is on some of the major commuter lines like the Metro North or New Jersey Transit or into Penn Station, sort of the big commuter hubs. And then there's the just getting around the city, right? So I think when it comes to getting around the city, meaning going from lower Manhattan to Midtown, I think you're going to see increased ride sharing, Ubers, walking if applicable, alternative things like ferries start to be worked in the system, city bikes. But when it comes to getting to Manhattan from 30 miles away plus, we have a real challenge. And I don't think anyone knows how we're going to solve it yet. And I just think it's just going to make New York probably one of the highest per capita work from home communities, certainly for the next 18 months plus.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of research in LA around one of the reasons they think that our infection rate is lower, maybe not in San Francisco, but in LA, because people get in their own cars, they drive themselves to work, they're not interacting as frequently with others from a public transit standpoint. And so recently, obviously, that is a thought of as to why we've kept our infection rate lower in LA. And I think it's interesting as we all move through this, it's really different on a state by state and on a city by city level. And so something that's affecting all of us is affecting all of us so differently. And so especially for a lot of us all represent, national companies, we have national tenants. From a change management perspective, how is that managed culturally? What can companies do that have very different situations in an office in New York or Boston compared to LA, compared to Dallas? I mean, what does that look like, and what can companies do to assist on kind of the change management, because we're all the cities are so different?
Sorry, I'm
Just
like
looking
trying
at
to
you,
digest it.
Liz.
I'm like, I am not
This
frozen.
was on the list, to be fair.
I know. I'm not frozen. I'm just thinking through it again because it changes every day. I think this is I think this goes into like the root of like, what is the culture of your company, and how does the culture need to shift because of this, and what new things are you going to embrace in order to make this an opportunity to strengthen your culture versus not. So, I mean, specifically your question about how do you, as a real estate team and as a workplace team, address different specific challenges in areas with public transportation versus places where you drive. I think, what I'm seeing through this is that in the early days, which we're still in, again, like the individualized approach really matters. And so some things we're seeing companies do that I think makes a lot of sense is doing really in detail surveying now when they have a little bit more time around, hey, how do you get to work? What are your alternates for getting to work if your common way is no longer comfortable? Like I personally take the BART into the office. Like that is how I commute most of the time. Like I personally, when this list, would likely feel comfortable doing that again in a staggered hour. Like I might not go in at 7:45, but would feel fine, going in at 10 as an example. And that could be one person's individualized feedback. There's others that, may not feel comfortable at all, and you should enlist either ride sharing alternates. Some of the other kind of more extreme examples I have heard, although I do not have an example of anyone executing on it, is this concept of creating neighborhood short-term hubs for the next 12 to 18 months. So just giving a Bay Area example, if you were a San Francisco-based company but had a substantial presence in the East Bay and you had not, kind of taken the leap, given that most people from the East Bay take in BART, which is now an impacted mode of transit, you could open up like a drop-in space in the East Bay that would be appropriate for meetings and try to figure that out. Now, obviously, drop-in and that idea of hoteling comes with a whole other host of challenges given the health crisis that we're in. But as you better learn to not only clean, but sanitize between use and how that will work, I have a feeling we're going to get smarter about this as time progresses. And these are some of the tactics that companies will take depending on the, really specific feedback of their employees and what they need to get through the next 18 months to 36 months.
Yeah, that's spot on. We've had a lot of large corporates and mostly financial services institutions talk to us about business continuity plans where, Jen, to your point, you're not hacking the subway transportation problem. So why don't we be smarter and let's find hubs, as Liz said, of ground scrapers with open parking, not covered parking, and every sort of hack we can think of that will make people feel safer and get them productive faster, and sign 3-year leases. So, Long Island, in give a New York example, finding a 2-story, 3-story building in Long Island, in New Jersey, in Westchester County, and Fairfield County, Connecticut, and understanding where the hubs of people are, as Liz said, and get them there, get them up and running, make them feel good. And again, the biggest challenge we're going to see is this is not the time to grow your real estate footprint. In fact, you can make the argument that most companies, and through the real estate professionals on the phone, you're going to be met with challenges that are going to be reducing your sales force and getting rid of unnecessary people or people that are legacy long-term people that are overpaid. This is a chance for all of us to rebuild our companies. And I think that one thing we're cognizant of is working harder and working smarter, and not letting the office get in the way of making office deals, as funny as that sounds. We're in a business in the brokerage side where we need a laptop, a phone, and a high supply of caffeine, and we're good to go. And I imagine there's more and more businesses that are more akin to us than traditional businesses, where you need to be unless you're a computer programmer, or most businesses, you can be anywhere to do. So I think that's going to certainly help us in the short term.
And is this one follow-up question, Ryan, before you move on? You mentioned short term, next 18 months. We all know there's changes coming in the short term. Does this change the long-term office? Is it too soon to tell? Do these practices stick?
Here's what I'll say. I think that, and Liz, tell me what you think. I think that people if the current densification is 100, I think the new densification is going to be 90. I just think we pushed it, especially in the TAMI industry. We just pushed it a little too far. People are on top of each other. You know what people's food smell like? It's just a little too much. I think you're going to get to a point where we're going to dial it back a little bit. There's going to be more private space where if you want to get out of a big open area and not feel like there's someone coughing on your neck, you're going to have the ability to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think, one of the things we've talked about a lot is how this crisis has sort of exacerbated trends that were previously happening in real estate and in the world in general. And I think we had a lot of pushback in the last 18 months with the density just being so dense that people no longer felt productive and creative. And so we were trying to figure out a way to shift that thinking. And I think now we have a public health crisis that is pushing us in the same exact direction. And I believe that once people adopt to this new way of being, the things that do make them more creative, productive people and companies will stay. And the elements of it that do not feel that way will sort of fall away over time as we get more comfortable, whether through a vaccine or another way that's unknown at this point.
You both represent Fortune 100 and 500 companies, name brands that we all know and love. I mean, they're the ones that have sort of the massive budgets, and they're the ones that are leading the charge, and that you see in the news right now about working from home, coming back into the office, changing the office. They just have a lot of cash even in this situation to do that. What if you're a smaller company that just doesn't have that kind of cash and is looking at this, as Ben said, as sort of an 18 to 30 month plan, looking at it like the psychological aspects here are really important also. Once a vaccine is here, many people believe that some of this stuff certainly decreases, our anxiety level a lot, right?
So what
do you do for, or better treatment, right? Exactly. So if you're looking at it from let's say a 2-year business plan perspective, what kinds of things can you do within the office or within your space that makes sense from a budgetary perspective if you're not, Google and Facebook and Twitter and, what do you do?
I think anything that is, more money than maybe a couple of privacy shields and supplemental cleaning, and as Liz said, some PPE, anything more than that is throwing good money at bad. We are telling our clients to go through a more rigorous work from home hybrid policy where people are coming in and out in A, B, and C shifts, and to touch a little of the furniture and a little of the fixtures, do no hard construction. In New York, you can't even do hard construction if you wanted to right now. But to spend that kind of money on the short term is just not a good use of capital for a mid-sized or small business. You should be focused on investing time in your people, making them more productive and comfortable in the home, and making them more comfortable in alternative locations to weather the storm.
Liz, what do you think? I mean, you work with a lot of these companies that have big pockets, but you work with a lot of them that don't.
Yeah, no, I do. And I think, even the ones with fairly large pockets are being very cautious about spending money right now until we really know how this works. I mean, a lot of people have engaged on the larger side, have engaged scientists and virologists and people who are experts in this field to try to study what's actually happening in the office environment so we can get better data and information in order to create behavioral and structural changes from that, because I don't yet feel like we have really good information about office transmission yet. I'm sure that will come, over time, but earlier stage companies, I think that Ben's right. Like there's two concepts we've heard, week on, week off, where you sort of go Monday through Thursday, and then, 3-day clean, and then swap groups. We've also heard, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday clean, and then swap groups again. And I think that all of these different patterns around it, there isn't a best practice. There's a best practice for your company. And the best way that you can do that is to survey, again, your employees, understand what they're able and willing to do, understand their specific concerns, and then try to put that against both your floor plan and your organizational chart to come up with a specific program around, what do I actually need people to do? And I think there's, some really great opportunities as well we talked about Zoom fatigue, and I think that's definitely, true, but trying to create more like less meeting oriented Zoom and more like catch up games, play code names, play something else over Zoom,
Right.
so that you can really kind of connect with each other and laugh and have some of that normalcy, because I think that the tiring part is just this continual, kind of in meetings that people are really not used to, especially when they're feeling normally stressed because of what's happening.
Right. Ben, you guys have some experience with this with 9/11, right? You're one of the only, if not the only city in the country that dealt with a major catastrophe before, and you saw a real estate market and the way people work and the way people go to work and their feelings of safety, all of that was thrown into question in a couple hours, nearly 20 years ago now. What's the impact now on kind of rents and do you think New York City is more equipped to handle it because they've been through it before? What are you hearing? I mean, is 9/11 coming up at all with regards to this?
So a lot of our institutional clients that own real estate is trying to understand, to benchmark the business interruption from the great financial crisis is probably a misnomer, right? That was a different, more, potentially deeper recession. Everyone's saying, well, what happened in 9/11 and how do you think that compares? So let's start with what happened in 9/11. On September 11th, we lost somewhere between 12 and 17 million feet, depending on which buildings you include, from our supply, right? New York at that time wasn't, but right now we're 400 million square feet of office space in Manhattan alone. So when you take away that supply, there was initial demand that was outsourced to other portions of the city. For example, Newmark's parent company, Cantor Fitzgerald, occupied the top of One World Trade Center and immediately signed a new lease at 499 Park Avenue, where they currently reside. So in terms of true supply and demand, here were the facts coming out of September 11th. It took us 3.1 years to reach from September 11th to the bottom of the market, right? We were in a recession. Now, we were coming off a dot-com bubble burst. Life was a little different. We probably would have been in a recession anyway, but that was the straw that sort of broke the financial back of our economy. Our availability rate jumped about 420 basis points from 10.1% to 14.3%. And our rent change was about 21.5%. So that's sort of what happened over the 3.1 years after 9/11. What was really interesting was, from a data perspective, we bounced back really quick. So from the bottom back to inflection only took about 3/4 of a year. And over that 3/4 of a year, our rents jumped about 35%, 34.6%. And we obviously regained all of that availability. And we candidly haven't dipped our availability into the single digits below 10% since then. So New York was able to rebound, but again, from a psychological standpoint, it was a one-time attack that took a lot longer in some ways to recover. It united us all. The enemy was visible, right? Everyone talks about the invisible enemy of coronavirus. It's hard to know who's affected, if they've been affected, when and why. And I think the lingering effects of all this is not an economic crisis; it's a public health crisis with economic impact. What I'm interested in learning about and studying is the difference in unemployment claims. And we can talk about that now or later, but I think a better moniker, better tracking mechanism is unemployment versus sort of the rental rate coming out of the last tragedy that we've seen, only because unemployment drives the leasing markets. It's how most decisions are made. Says a good market versus a bad market is generally stem from where unemployment sits, and if companies are growing, hiring, and investing in the real estate. So we're really interested in tracking those metrics.
Liz, how about you guys? I mean, there's been certain parts of the economy that have blown up in San Francisco specifically, especially the dot-com bubble. 99, 2000, 2001, leading up to that. I mean, Are you hearing remnants of that in terms of how offices are viewed, designed, what the market looks like, how it comes back?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we obviously had a pretty quick and hard recession after the dot-com boom in 2001, and we saw rents drop, almost 50% within 5 quarters. So it was a very hard time for our city. At that time, though, a majority of the tenants in the San Francisco market were not sort of later stage publicly traded companies like they are now. If you look at the sub landlords of today or the tenants that are in the market today, about 50% of them are actually publicly traded. So we have a much stronger credit market, which will impact how we do going forward. The other thing to realize about San Francisco is, we went into this crisis with a 3.2% vacancy, which I believe is the lowest in the country, by quite a bit. And in San Francisco, we only have one new significant office building that's under construction. It delivers next year. And we don't have anything else for 12 to 18 months after that is delivering because of our city laws and restrictions around building office space. So we've dealt with an environment where we've had a lot of demand. 13 companies have outpaced the delivery of our entire market from new product over the last 5 or 6 years. And at the same time, we have not really moved the supply side. So I do think that sort of protects and insulates us as we go forward. With that being said, our subleasing is up, almost 80% over the 4-quarter average of 2019. And you have to believe that those subleases will affect rental rates in our market, and it will affect, how tenants view availabilities and what their options are.
Well, and as we talk about everything that affects from unemployment to subleases to maybe shrinking square footage. I mean, another big question for all of our markets, LA included, is co-working and the amount of co-working space that, everyone's favorite question, right? That's really built up the market in all of the major markets over the last few years. And, what does that look like? Because I think we all agree, just from a sheer volume and supply of co-working space, as well as just the general feel and layout and what that means looking at co-working space and people wanting to work in co-working space, or I should say not work in co-working space. How does that affect, and we can talk about LA too, but we'll start with, you guys, San Francisco, New York.
Well, especially on the interior of the space, right? How's that change going forward? Not just the market specifics, but actually the actual space itself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Liz, you want me to start?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So there's sort of two metrics, as Ryan said, right? There's the how much space they occupy, right? Co-working is about 18 million square feet leased in New York City. I think San Francisco is a little bit below that, but both are about 4%.
Only 4.5% of our market.
Right, we're about 4, so roughly the same amount on a percentage basis in New York and San Francisco. But the seismic change we're going to see is the type of co-working, right? There's multiple flex office providers. There's sort of the big open WeWork floor that has 1,000 different candle makers, and then there's the more enterprise spaces where you have a company that has its own ecosystem. You can close the front door. It's a controlled environment. So we think the likelihood of the controlled environment type flex office providers, we see a future for. We think 100% of the open plan flex office co-working scenarios will be no longer in existence. We think those people will either be working from home or they will be in smaller but designated private suites. This whole concept of putting a disproportionate amount of people onto one full floor is too much of a threat to the public health crisis. In addition to that, when and if space becomes more balanced and certificates of occupancy and sort of how many people you put on a floor does change, if it does change, coworkers will lose their margins completely, right? The magic of co-working is that you could put a lot of people onto a floor and upcharge it to do a little bit better than break even. If you're not packing in those floors, from what we've seen, the math doesn't work. So the big question will be, will the enterprise business be here to stay? And will the real estate directors on the phone and on the chat think, you know what, I still want to use a flex model in my 3rd and 4th tier cities, because the thought of doing a construction project and building 3 offices and doing all that stuff is just not for me.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, Ben. The only thing I'd add is that I do think that this is creating an opportunity for landlords to think about what they've learned about the needs of tenants from flex office providers. And, that's having lower term, willing to pay up for having a shorter term and flexibility, needing to have more phased growth, needing to have space that's furnished, needing to have space that's potentially off balance sheet. And I think that, the really smart landlords are looking at that, recognizing that they're going to have more and more space come back to the market, likely, especially in places like San Francisco and New York, that is relatively ready to go. And have we gotten to a place where they can sort of convince their own investors that it makes sense for them to do deals that look more like what Flex has looked like in the last 18 to 24 months. And I think, Industrious has been partnering with landlords in that pursuit for quite a while now. There's certainly others as well. And I really believe that model has a lot of room to grow, going forward over the next 12 or 18 months. Because per Ben's point, and the panelists should jump in as well, real estate directors still need this solution. They just need it to be a little bit different than what it's looked like in the past.
Yeah, I think for all of our landlords and that we speak to on a regular basis, and we over the last few years from the tenant representation side, we ask and we ask and we ask. They want flexibility, and clients want short terms, and clients want spec suites, and landlords build spec suites, and lo and behold, they get leased, and they're like, oh, yeah, that worked. This shouldn't be this new phenomenon anymore. And so, yeah, hopefully sometimes you have to learn the hard way. Hopefully from a landlord standpoint, this is an entirely new revenue stream for landlords that I think is much more lucrative than many of them believe it to be. And if they can get lenders and institutional capital on board with this type of a model, this is just a brand new model in real estate that we really haven't seen yet, that I think is probably better than kind of V1 co-working.
Yeah, Jen, that's the critical piece, right? Net operating income is looked on an annualized basis. So how do building owners, what does taking a portion of the building and making it direct co-working, owner-sponsored co-working, right? How does that impact the ability to refinance and sell the asset, right? I think once our capital markets figure that out, and they will, every landlord in America will have a percentage of their portfolio as their own co-working model.
100%. But I think now it's obviously a really interesting time, because when you were in a straight boom market, your alternative was to lease it for 5 or 7 years to someone else. But in a situation like we're in right now, where that landscape may change, who knows? We're not out of this yet. And it might be, hey, do a shorter term plug and play lease, or let the space be empty. Potentially that will be a way for us to adopt this more. But you're absolutely right. Capital markets needs to catch up with the needs of tenants on this topic.
And to your point too, sorry, just to finish, the changes in GAAP accounting and the impact of FASB 13, it's a no-brainer, and that's gasoline on the fire for short-term sort of flex office deals. Sorry, Jen, I cut you off.
We're going to need right now, given everything that's going on. It's going to be the time to do it.
Right. And you didn't know, I was going to add too, I think we've all realized that the beauty and the allure of co-working is not kombucha and beer, it's flexibility. So, for landlords to be able to run these themselves and think they can do it, or think they don't have to, they don't have to compete with some of the fluff that really wasn't the value that was being provided to tenants, that look, people don't want right now anyway, because you're not going to stand around a water cooler. They've got garbage bags over them,
Yeah.
So,
to all of those points, we've had a couple of these really good attendee questions come in before we kind of get to the end here. And one of them said, we all work in markets where governors are being very cautious to prevent a second wave and keep lowering the curve. Certainly in LA, San Francisco, and New York. How do you feel about states that are opening sooner and seem to be rushing it a bit? If that goes wrong, it could have a detrimental effect on the country and therefore our cities, which is a really great question about, how we think about the markets, how we think about our space, how we think about everything we're talking about. As you guys talk to especially your institutional ownerships, are you having conversations about, when they want to, kind of go live with some of the stuff that they are thinking about, whether it's temperature testing or elevators, or, Ben gave a great stat a couple days ago about the average floor in New York. I'd love for you to go through that, Ben, but are you,
Sure.
what are your thoughts on that?
So it's funny, right? We're reliant in New York City on the Real Estate Board in New York, which is a government liaised entity that allows us to help with policy and decision making, right? I don't think any owner is going to be ahead of the curve. When you ask the question, how do we, deal with regional other regions of our country not sheltering in place as long, I think the question ultimately is, I don't know that it's as worrisome as the region of the Northeast, right? As Governor Cuomo said, and I'm loving his press conferences. He's channeling his inner, Pacino playing Jimmy Hoffa. It's absolutely fantastic. But I think that at the end of the day, the comment is true, which is it's more about what Connecticut, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts do versus collectively versus if Florida and Georgia and parts of the South and Midwest are opening probably earlier than they should, and that just kind of is what it is. You can't control it. I think our regional coordination is essential, and that's what our institutional and even national clients are focused on. But to answer your question, Ryan, about New York City specifically and how it will be impacted by opening too early, New York City, again, I said it was about 400 million square feet of office space. 95% of the buildings are 10 stories or higher. And a lot of the architects we've been speaking to told us that people will not walk. And I don't know if it's physically unfit like I am or just can't do it. Ryan, you could probably walk 60 stories. But I think that if you're not able to walk more than 10 stories and you're reliant on an elevator, which is one and the same, you need to have a different set of cleaning protocols and procedures in place. So, maybe there's not more than 2 people in the elevator. And again, the Real Estate Board of New York is going to drive a lot of decision-making for owners, and owners are going to adapt and either choose to be on the front lines like a Scott Reckler and SL Green or some of the larger landlords in New York. And they're going to be the family owners that are going to be last to adapt because it is what it is. So I think we're going to see the spectrum.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you just said. And I think the other thing I would add, which I think we touched on a little bit earlier, is even when governors or city officials open the cities and sort of resume the economy, that does not necessarily mean that the clients that we work with are going to be following those orders specifically. In many cases, they're looking at it like, look, let's let some restaurants reopen with social distancing. Let's, let the people who really need to go back to work because there's no ability for them to work at home go back. That's obviously very important for our economy. Let's see how that goes. Let's start some early shift work. Let's see how that goes. And then let's ease ourselves back into this with a very close eye on monitoring all of our health and where breakouts are occurring. And obviously, sharing best practices between the different areas. Places like Atlanta will be very, very interesting to watch because there are certain aspects of that city that are more similar to New York and San Francisco in terms of being, densely populated, some high rises. And I know that a lot of the landlords and tenants that I work with that also have space in those markets are looking at them and saying, okay, like what are we learning? And let's share the information throughout. I think this has really highlighted a more collaborative spirit around, how tenants and landlords talk to each other. And then also through how we talk with our, what's usually seen as competition in order to create best practices around what we do, because it's really about people's health and well-being. And that should be, above all of us trying to sort of hack the best trick.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you flip it around, right, like we actually are all very privileged to be in, especially these states where we can wait and see. Yeah. And we don't have to be the guinea pigs for as much as all of us want to get back to work and we want the economy to go again and we want to go out to eat and we miss our friends and our coworkers and everything. We are really lucky to be able to kind of take cues from what others get right, what other cities get wrong. So I think we're just shy of an hour and we're going to always end it on a positive note. So other than being kind of privileged as we watch others go back, what is the most positive thing to come out of this, either for you guys personally, for your clients? Because there are positives.
Ben,
Nothing. Zero. Nothing.
Yeah, I'm not a very positive person.
I know I'm really making
I'll be positive
right now.
I'm like, Rome is always burning over here. But here's what
You're a New Yorker.
Here's what I'll say. I've noticed, look, there, Jen just touched on something. We are all privileged. We're not on the front lines where we lease office space for a living. Let's put it in perspective, right? There's people out there that are risking their lives to help other people in the medical field, to deliver food and infrastructure. And there's, New York is really hardest hit in its low income areas. And it's sort of a metaphor for, where our society's headed. And I won't get political, other than to say I'm not going to be drinking Lysol anytime soon. But what I will say is that you see a lot of people doing good for others, and I think that needs to continue. And I think that's more important than corporate profits and all the other bullshit we worry about all day. And I think we have to take into we all locked in our homes, trying to do the right thing for the person who delivered our mail or got us our Amazon packages, or the grocery worker that's sitting in an N95 mask so we could have, the right kind of Pop-Tarts. I just think that's what we need to take that sentiment. And if there's anything positive, we carry it forward and we teach it to our children and we teach it to each other and we try to do the right thing by people.
For not being positive, that was really great.
I mean, that was just so good, Ben.
The most I've ever heard from you. Well, Ben, well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's too perfect.
Liz, what about you?
No, I think, echoing a lot of Ben's sentiments, I feel an immense amount of gratitude for all of the people who are really risking their own health in a very different way than any of us have ever contemplated doing in order for us to have a semblance of a normal life while we're staying at home. I've also been really touched at how you can find community in places that you weren't expecting it. So, usually I think all four of us are pretty social people. If you would have told me in January that I would have been staying inside of my home for a majority of 12 weeks, I probably would have been in a complete panic. And I'm really shocked at now, my mornings are doing Peloton with friends, and it's kind of similar to what it was, just in its own environment. And in the evenings, you might be jumping on House Party or something else and kind of, doing other things to connect with people. And I am amazed by sort of the resilient spirit of people. I'm also amazed at how much communities have come together to support neighbors where someone maybe isn't able to, do things that other people are right now. And I think that it's really going to, again, like Ben said, help us prioritize what's really important in life and focus on that going forward and integrate it into what will be our new normal.
Hey,
so
there's two more questions, right? Should we answer these questions before we go?
Let's answer those, and then we'll end it with the poll, because a lot of people when they RSVP, they had our last question, which is really, I think, important, what a lot of people want to know. So one question that came in is, do you see rents going lower in the next 12 to 18 months? And if so, which type of office inventory is more vulnerable? I mean, clearly rents are going to decrease. They're going to go down. Many of us are tracking the Shanghai office market right now. I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. They're the first major office market to come back online since after coronavirus. Those rents have come down anywhere from. What's that, Liz?
How much have they come down?
5 to 15%. 5 to 15%. And the 15%ers were the buildings that were kind of the most inflated, those really true trophy class A's. And the 5 and 10%ers were, below that. So they're definitely coming down. In terms of which one is the most vulnerable, I actually think, a lot of people are saying right now, we think that buildings, and clients are asking us all the time too, we think buildings that are heavily saturated with co-working, especially a WeWork right now, which is in a really tight spot, they're particularly vulnerable. I don't know what your positions are or feelings are on this, but a lot of those landlords that have WeWorks in them have 2 and 3 years of deposit, that they can just draw on and ride this thing out and keep getting paid every single month for, sometimes 36. I had a landlord tell me last week they have 3.5 years. They said they truly couldn't care less what happens until 2024. So I don't know that those that have WeWork are particularly vulnerable because of that, but I don't see any one office building being more vulnerable than another. I actually think what will determine that is going to be have less to do with the market and more to do with how those landlords respond to their clean practices going forward, and the things that they institute within their lobbies and their common areas and their restrooms and their corridors, elevators. Those are the ones that I think are more vulnerable, the ones that don't put up a little bit of capital now to give people that psychological feeling that they're healthy when they walk into the building.
But that'll be the same as in any softer market. There's always a flight to quality, and that will continue here because those are generally the landlords that will invest the dollars. They will be ahead of the curve. They will think about this creatively. And so, I mean, really no different. That will continue. The tenants that are in the market that are growing, that are looking for space, will continue to seek quality, as in any kind of softer market.
Yeah, I agree. So our last question, which a lot of people had when they RSVP'd, as I said, and are really, because of your two cities, are really looking at it and asking the same questions. When will your city go back to work, fully up and running and really operating again in whatever the new normal is?
We have a
I
side
can't tell
bet
you how many
going.
people
So
RSVP'd with this, so we have to end with it because a lot of people asked.
Liz?
I mean, I feel fairly confident that we will have some people going back into the office by midsummer. I think your question of fully up and running, we need to define what we mean by fully up and running. If that means, every single person back in the office full time, I think we're looking at, 18 months and longer, but to a new normal that feels highly functional, where businesses are again, working in a way that they feel comfortable, where they've adjusted work from home and shift work to make it more palatable to their employees and to their business production. I think you're thinking like towards the end of the year, beginning of next year, because since we've never done this before, it's a great work from home experiment that we're all living through right now. It's going to take a couple iterations to really get it right.
Yeah.
You guys are in LA, so I'm going to quote Samuel Goldwyn, the founder of MGM. Nobody knows anything. That was his commentary on how you could predict what movies would be a commercial success. We have no freaking clue, and we're not going to have an idea. I think testing and tracing need to ramp up drastically before we can even make that guess. But you want me to make a blanket guess, so I'll make a blanket guess. July 4th, even though I never think that's going to happen. Thank you.
July 4th of 2020?
2020?
I think Newmark, New York City opens up, meaning people can go work there, right? Meaning in shifts, like Liz said, it'll be slow. I think our offices will be open for people to work on a limited 5 to 20% basis in New York City by July 4th.
Wow. That's more aggressive than I
Ryan's
thought you'd
favorite
say.
holiday, so.
It is. Wow.
Hopefully that's
good
the
to know.
case.
Look, we
in New
appreciate
York. See how much fun you have.
we appreciate everyone joining us today. It's been fun to watch the numbers and how many people have been on and stayed on the entire time. So this has been awesome. Thank you so much for everyone. We really, really appreciate it. Ben and Liz, you are two of our favorite and our closest friends. We appreciate you doing this for us and being on and giving your expert opinions. Thank you guys so much. And
thank you guys. Be safe.
Yeah, it's great.
See you guys in 2 weeks.
Be
Stay
well.
tuned.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.